Welcome to the podcast. My name is Father Bill W. I'm an Episcopal priest living here in Austin, Texas, and have had the gift of recovery since December the 27th of 1972. For that, I am very, very grateful. Purpose of these podcasts is to go a little bit deeper into the history, the spirituality, and the psychology of the 12-step fellowships to give people a richer understanding of kind of where AA came from and hopefully what it can do for everybody who wants to go a little bit deeper in some of these subjects. This series we're doing right now is titled Spiritual and Religious. Idea is we often hear in AA and other 12-step fellowships that I'm spiritual, but not religious. So I want to just kind of poke around and see if there is anything that religion may have to offer back to the 12-step fellowships. There are two communities that ought to be in communication, and yet there's difference in languages, there's difference in focus. It's easy to maybe focus on how they're different, and I just want to see if there are some things that they have in common that they can mutually benefit one another. So I did the 3 episodes with Professor Stephen Haynes on why can't the church be more like an AA meeting, and I've got a few more guests lined up for interviews. I'm having some schedule difficulties. So I thought what I'd put in this episode is something that I'd wanted to do for a while. It's an article by Sam Shoemaker. Sam Shoemaker, of course, was the Episcopal priest who was the head of the Oxford group in the United States, and Bill Wilson credits him with teaching him 10 of the 12 steps, that he got those directly from Sam Shoemaker. So it was a huge influence on Bill Wilson. He spoke at AA's 20th anniversary in St. Louis in 1955. And he wrote an article, his reflections on what that was like and what it is that AA has to teach the church. I'm hopeful at the end of this series, I might be able to put together 3 or 4 things that the church has to teach AA and the fellowships. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, that's kind of my intent. I'm going to read his article. I've probably read it 20, 30 times. It's a very powerful piece of reflection on the nature of AA recovery. And there's also in the show notes a link to Step Study. Step Study, my friend James R. in Wisconsin has a wonderful website. I encourage you to visit it. The link is again in the show notes. This will take you directly to the Shoemaker article. So if you're driving, you can listen to it, but if you're not, encourage you just download it and you can skip my reading of it and just do it directly yourself. So let's go ahead and get started. He starts off, and again, he's addressing this to the people in his church primarily. So the other half of the audience. He writes, during the weekend of the 4th of July last, I attended one of the most remarkable conventions I ever expect to attend. It was a gathering in St. Louis of about 5,000 members of the movement called Alcoholics Anonymous. The occasion was the celebration of their 20th anniversary and the turning over freely and voluntarily of the management and destiny of that great movement by the founders and old timers to a board which represents the fellowship as a whole. As I lived and moved among these men and women for 3 days, I was moved as I have seldom been moved in my life. It happens that I have watched the unfolding of this movement with more than usual interest, for its real founder and guiding spirit, Bill W., found his initial spiritual answer at Calvary Church in New York when I was rector there in 1935. Having met two men, unmistakable alcoholics, who had found release from their difficulty, he was moved to seek out the same answer for himself. But he went further. Being of a foraging and inquiring mind, he began to think there was some general law operating here, which could be made to work not in two men's lives only, but in 2,000 or 2,000,000. He set to work to find out what it was. He consulted psychiatrists, doctors, clergy, and recovered alcoholics to discover what it was. The first actual group was not in New York, but in Akron, Ohio. Bill was spending a weekend there in a hotel. The crowd was moving towards the bar. He was lonely and felt danger assailing him. He consulted the church directory in the hotel lobby and found the name of a local clergyman and his church. He called him on the telephone and said, "I'm an alcoholic down here at the hotel. The going is a little hard just now. Have you anybody you think I might meet and talk to?" He gave him the name of a woman who belonged to one of the great tire manufacturing families. He called her. She invited him out at once and said she had a man she wanted to have him meet. While he was on his way, she called Dr. Bob S. and his wife Ann. Dr. Bob said he'd give her 5 minutes. He stayed 5 hours and told Bill, "You're the only man I've ever seen with the answer to alcoholism." I remarked that I thought it had been wise for AA to confine its activity to alcoholics. But I added, I think we may see an effect of AA on medicine, on psychiatry, on correction, on the ever-present problem of human nature, and not least on the church. AA indirectly derived much of its inspiration from the church. Now, perhaps, the time has come for the church to be reawakened and revitalized by those insights and practices found in AA. I think some of you may be a little horrified at this suggestion. I fear you will be saying to yourself, what have we, who have always been decent people, to learn from a lot of reconstructed drunks? And perhaps you may thereby reveal to yourself how very far you are from the Spirit of Christ and the gospel, and how very much in need of precisely the kind of checkup that may come to us from AA. If I need a text for what I say to you, there is one ready to hand in 1 Corinthians 1 through 26. God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. I need not remind you that there is a good deal of sarcasm in that verse, because it must be evident that anything God can use is neither foolish nor weak, and that if we consider ourselves wise and strong, we may need to go to school to those who we have called foolish and weak. Shoemaker then lists 4 points that he says the church really needs to learn from AA. The first he titles Recognition of Need. The first thing I think the church needs to learn from AA is that nobody gets anywhere till he recognizes a clearly defined need. These people do not come to AA to get made a little better. They do not come because the best people are doing it. They come because they are desperate. They are not, ladies and gentlemen, looking for a religion. They are utterly desperate men and women in search of redemption. Without what AA gives, death stares them in the face. With what AA gives them, there is life and hope. There are not a dozen ways. There are not two ways. There is one way, and they find it or perish. AAs each and all have a definite, desperate need. They have the need, and they are ready to tell somebody what it is if they see the least chance that it can be met. Is there anything as definite for you or me who may happen not to be alcoholics? If there is, I am sure that it lies in the realm of our conscious withholding of the truth about ourselves from God and from one another by pretending that we are already good Christians. The relief of being accepted can never be known by one who never thought himself unaccepted. I hear of good Christian men and women belonging to, quote, fine old church families, unquote. There were no good Christians in the first church, only sinners. Peter never let himself or his hearers forget his betrayal in the hour the cock crew. James, stung by the memory of his years of stubborn resistance, warned the church members, confess your faults to one another. That was before there were fine old church families. Today, the last place where one can be candid about one's faults is in a church. In a bar, yes. In a church, no. I know. I've tried both places. Shoemaker goes on, let that sting you and me just as it should, and make us miserable with our church Phariseeism, till we see it just as definite and just as hideous as anybody's drunkenness can ever be, and a great deal more really dangerous. Second thing Shoemaker says we can learn from AA is redeemed in life-changing fellowship. The second thing the church needs to learn from AA is that men are redeemed in a life-changing fellowship. AA does not expect to let anybody who comes in stay as he is. They know he is in need and must have help. They live for nothing else but to extend and keep extending that help. Like the church, they did not begin in glorious Gothic structures, but in houses or caves in the earth, wherever they could get a foothold, meet people, and gather. It never occurs to an AA that it is enough for him to sit down and polish his spiritual nails all by himself, or dust off his soul all by himself, or spend a couple of minutes praying each day all by himself. His soul gets kept in order by trying to help other people get their souls in order with the help of God. At once, a new person takes his place in this redeeming, life-changing fellowship. He may be changed today and out working tomorrow. No long, senseless delays about giving away what he has got. He's ready to give the little he has the moment it comes to him. The fellowship that redeemed him will wither and die unless he and others like him get in and keep that fellowship moving and growing by reaching others. Recently, I heard an AA say that he could stay away from his veterans meeting, his legion, or his church, and nobody would notice it. But if he stayed away from his AA meeting, his telephone would begin to ring the next day. A life-changing fellowship sounds like a description of the church. It is, of the ideal church, but the actual, not 1 in 100 is like this. The laymen say this is the minister's job, and the ministers say it is the evangelist's job, and everybody finds a rationalized excuse for not doing what every Christian ought to be doing. That is, bringing other people into the redeeming, life-changing fellowship. The third thing the church needs to learn from AA is the necessity for definite personal dealing with people. AAs know all the stock excuses. They've used them themselves and heard them 100 times. All the blame put on someone else. My temperament is different. I've tried it and it doesn't work for me. I'm not really that bad. I just slip a little sometimes. They've heard them all and know them for the rationalized pack of lies they are. They constitute, taken together, the gospel of hell and failure. I've heard them laboring with one another, now patient as a mother, now savage as a prize fighter, now careful in explanation, now pounding in a heavy personal challenge, but always knowing the desperate need and the sure answer. Are we in the church like that? Have you ever been drastically dealt with by anybody? Have you ever dared to be drastic in love with anybody? We are so official, so polite, so ready to accept ourselves and each other at face value. I went for years before ever I met a man that dared get at my real needs, create a situation in which I could be honest with him and hold me to a specific Christian commitment and decision. One can find kindness and even good advice in the church. That is not all men need. They need to be helped to face themselves as they really are. The AA people see themselves just as they are. I think many of us in the church see ourselves as we should like to appear to others, not as we are before God. We need drastic personal dealing and challenge. Who is ready and trained to give it to us? How many of us have ever taken a fearless moral inventory of ourselves and dared make the depth of our need known to any other human being? This gets at the pride, which is the hindrance and sticking point for so many of us, and which for most of us in the church has never even been recognized, let alone faced or dealt with. The fourth thing the church needs to learn from AA is the necessity for a real change of heart, a true conversion. As we come Sunday after Sunday, year after year, we are supposed to be in a process of transformation. Are we? The AAs are. At each meeting, there are people seeking and in conscious need. Everybody is pulling for the people who speak and looking for more insight and help. They are pushed by their need. They are pulled by the inspiration of others who are growing. They are a society of the before and after, with a clear line between the old life and the new. This is not the difference between sinfulness and perfection, but it is the difference between accepted wrongdoing and the genuine beginning of a new way of life. How about us? Again, I quote Jerome Ellison in his report to God. He says, I began to see that many of the parishioners did not really want to find you, because finding you would change them from their habitual ways, and they did not want to endure the pain of change. For our churchmen like crimes of bland, impenetrable pose, I offer shame. No ordinary service of worship in the church can possibly do this. We need to supplement what we do now by the establishment of informal companies where people who are spiritually seeking can see how faith takes hold in other lives, how the characteristically Christian experience comes to them. Some churches are doing this, but not nearly enough of them. One I know where on Sunday evenings, laymen and women speak simply about what has happened to them spiritually. It is drawing many more by attraction. This needs to be multiplied by the tens of thousands, and the church itself awakened. As I look out over the crowd of 5,000 in Kiel Auditorium in St. Louis, I said to myself, would that the church were like this. Ordinary men and women with great need who have found a great answer and do not hesitate to make it known wherever they can. A trained army of enthusiastic, humble human workers whose efforts make life a different thing for other people. Let us ask God to forgive our blindness and laziness and complacency, and through these remade people, to learn our need for honesty, for conversion, for fellowship, and for honest witness. Shoemaker was a gifted writer, a gifted preacher, an insightful man who loved his church, but saw something happening in the AA movement that he helped to give birth to. And he wanted to carry that message back to the people who were sitting all too comfortably in his pews. When I started to study Shoemaker, he challenged me. He was a man who could see the value both in the church, because he never left it, and in AA, that they were doing something over there that should have been happening on the other end of town as well. So anyway, he's also got a poem called I Stand by the Door. You might look that up on the internet, Sam Shoemaker, I Stand by the Door. It's a marvelous poem that really gets to the heart of what helping people to find change is really, really all about. So I'm going to continue this series. Got a couple of people lined up who have benefited from living in both worlds, living both within AA recovery and coupled that with participation in the church. And I want to hear from them and see what they've experienced. So hope this was helpful. Again, go to the show notes. You can get a copy of the article for yourself. And I think it's got a lot to offer. So thank you for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.